What if I told you that Hamilton's 5th position in the classification of the Canada 2025 GP was actually one of the most important and most ignored moments of the whole season? What you are going to see now you will not find in summaries or holders. I will show you why this classification session silently changed Ferrari's course, and Hamilton himself. During Friday's free training, the magnitude of the challenge was evident. While many pilots began to find sensations, Hamilton seemed caught in a constant contradiction between what his body asked him and what the SF-25 needed. The result was a 5th place in the FP1, followed by an 8th in the FP2. It was not a disaster, but a clear sign that something was not right. And most worrying, Lewis knew. What nobody showed is what happened outside track that afternoon. Ferrari's technical team, led by Jacques Clear and Riccardo Adami, locked Hamilton in the portable simulation room. It was not a common session. They were redrawing the way Lewis stopped, how he applied the accelerator, how he negotiated the pianos. The objective: deactivate their Mercedes reflexes, to replace them with a version adapted to the SF-25, a car that responds better to a more aggressive driving on the front axle and more loose on the rear. Meanwhile, Charles Leclerc dealt with an accident in the FP1 that damaged his chassis. This left Hamilton as Ferrari's only real reference to extract useful data. The pressure doubled. It was not just about improving their own performance, but about marking the technical path for the entire team. And all this in a weekend where rain was foreseen for Sunday and where each session had double. In the midst of that chaos, Lewis suggested his emotional state. In subsequent statements, he acknowledged, "This car does not behave like any that I had here before. I still look for that confidence that allows me to push the limit without thinking." They were not empty words. He was saying that his instinctive connection with the vehicle that had given him championships did not exist in this new environment. The most shocking thing, however, was not what he said, but what he hinted. When he said that getting to Q3 will be difficult at this rhythm, he was notifying that Ferrari did not have, at that time, a rhythm of classification or balanced consistency. It was a veiled message, both for engineers and for the press. Do not wait miracles because I can't invent them when the car does not respond. What nobody showed you is that this phrase hid another even harder truth. Hamilton was alone. Leclerc was out of play after the accident. The car had configuration problems. And the team was divided between two development philosophies. In that context, the classification was not just a 12-minute session in Q3. It was an internal battle to show that the Hamilton-Ferrari project could have a future. Therefore, when we see that P5 on the timesheet, we should not read it as a simple position. It was the closure of an agonizing process, of a full day of reinvention, to fight against data, ghosts, and expectations. It was the confirmation that, although the environment changed, the champion instinct was still intact. Because to achieve that result, Hamilton not only had to beat the clock, he had to overcome Ferrari, who still doesn't understand. 3 sessions, 3 opportunities, 3 moments where any error sentences you. In Montreal, the classification is a war against the clock, but also against the most treacherous layout of the calendar. Curves 3 and 4 with their high-output pianos, the area of the wall of the champions where every millimeter can define your destination, and the lines where the minimum loss of traction at the curve outlet relegates 2 positions. It is there where Hamilton's true story began in Canada 2025. In Q1, Hamilton came out with used soft compounds. The strategy was to keep the maximum tires for a hypothetical Q3, something that, sincerely, was not guaranteed. In his first laps, he marked conservative times, evaluating how the SF-25 behaved with the new balance corrections made during the night. In the box, tension was red. The engineers watched telemetrias with nervousness. There were competitive sectors, but also subviring peaks and slow curves. And then, when they needed it, Hamilton's first warning appeared. In his second round, even in Q1, he managed to put his car comfortably in the top 10. It was not a spectacular time, but a clear sign. The car was no longer fighting against him, and he began to fight with the circuit. That little internal victory gave him confidence. He did not celebrate. He didn't comment on radio. I simply knew it was inside. Q2 was another challenge. Here, the margins narrow. And that is where many pilots with decent cars are left out for not finding space, or for not adapting their return launch to traffic. Hamilton chose to leave late, a risk maneuver. I would only have a clear chance. And in that unique attempt, he executed an impeccable lap. Each braking point was calibrated with surgical precision. The passage through the second sector was particularly revealing. A mini sector 2 faster even than that of Max Verstappen in that same section. But what few know is that this return in Q2 was made with a less aggressive motor map. Ferrari reserved everything for Q3. So what we saw was a turn with margin, a tactical return. He entered Q3 in 6th provisional position, and Jacques Clear's smile in the garage was more expressive than any celebration. They knew they were in the fight, but there was still the most difficult. The Q3, the decisive instance. Here everything is defined. Here there is no time for conservative essays or strategies. All set up the best tire game. All open DRS at the exact point. Everyone goes to the limit with the almost empty tank and accelerated heart. And in that stage, Hamilton took the experience of more than a decade fighting for poles. His final lap was executed with a serenity that only the champions have. In Curve 1, he placed the car just on the vertex without losing the traction. In the chicane of the second sector, he used the internal piano as support, not as an obstacle, winning tenths that Leclerc and other pilots lost to stop too much. And in the famous wall of the champions, he did not raise his foot. It went to centimeters from the wall, taking advantage of the bounce of clean air that gives stability in the last second. It was a return calculated to the limit, but without exceeding it. The result was a 1:11,526, which placed it in 5th final position. It was not pole. It was not a record return. But it was, in context, a masterpiece. Behind the poleman Russell, just 6 tenths, but ahead of pilots such as Fernando Alonso, Carlos Sainz, and even his own companion Leclerc for more than 2 tenths. But here's what nobody showed you. That final lap was obtained without the help of rebuffs, without aggressive motor modes in the first sector, and with a more charged aerodynamic configuration than the rest. Ferrari had opted for a more stable car in the race, and Hamilton knew it. His return was not just an attempt to classify well, it was also a proof of what he could do on Sunday. I was preparing the land, visualizing what it would be like to compete from that position, with a car that responded predictably in braking and changes of direction. The answer is not simple, but this P5 launches a warning. If the SF-25 finds consistency in the next circuits, the British pilot is ready to capitalize. Because unlike other names on the grill, Hamilton does not need a perfect window of conditions to perform. He demonstrated it in Montreal, drawing the best of a car that still behaves like a beast without tame. And that, in itself, changes everything. Because the rest of the grill also saw it. Verstappen, Russell, Piastri, everyone knows what it means to see Hamilton involved in the top 5 with a car that was not designed for Montreal. If you achieve this consistency, if you can repeat this type of actions in high aerodynamic or more aggressive urban paths, your performance curve can grow exponentially. But perhaps the most powerful message of this classification was not for rivals or for the team. It was for Hamilton himself. Montreal returned something he had lost since his last great competitive year in 2021. The conviction that he can still make the difference with his hands, with his focus, with his determination. Not with the most dominant car. Not with the best conditions. But with his instinct. In an era where everything seems defined by statistics, simulations, and performance algorithms, sometimes we forget that Formula One remains, in its purest essence, a deeply human struggle. That is why what happened in the Montreal classification cannot and should not be measured only in tenths. It was a warning. One of those signs that history only recognizes in retrospect. Lewis Hamilton did not win the pole. He did not go to the podium. He didn't even lead a free session. But what he did was even more valuable. He claimed authority without having the car faster. It transformed an unstable machinery into a functional tool. And above all, he took control of a narrative that until recently was foreign, that of being the outsider within Ferrari. Montreal was no exception. It was a silent warning. A contained demonstration of what can happen when the experience meets the right opportunity. And when that happens, the lines between the past and the future are blurred. We are no longer seeing an ex-cast looking for redemption. We are seeing a competitor who wants to write his last great act, with red ink. So while others celebrated their poles, their podiums, their headlines, Hamilton just got out of the car, the helmet was removed, and looked forward. Like who knows that the important thing is not how you start, but how you end. What we saw in Montreal was not a simple Moore classification on the Lewis Hamilton statistics sheet. It was an open letter written with talent, precision, and a fierce will to redeem. It was the silent proof that even in the midst of media noise, technical doubts, criticisms, and expectations not fulfilled, Hamilton still has more to say. Because this performance was not explosive. It was not cover. It was not held with cuffs high or grandiloquent statements. But it was, perhaps because of that, much more powerful. Because it represents that kind of greatness that does not need to shout to be heard. One that is built in the early morning when the garage is silent, the sleeping paddock, and only the pilots who have not resigned to fight. And you are seeing this, know that there is something special at this time. Something that goes beyond Ferrari, beyond the stopwatch, beyond positions. This is the spirit of Formula One in its purest form. A man and his machine facing the impossible and finding, against all prognosis, a way of prevailing. It is impossible to know if Hamilton will win another career. If it will rise again to the top of the podium. If you can beat McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull in a direct duel. But after Montreal, what we can say is that it is prepared. It is ready. And most importantly, he has believed again. And that, in this sport, everything changes. That's why I want to ask you something directly. Do you think this performance was just a good day, or was it the beginning of something much bigger? Can this 5th place in Canada be the turning point that transforms Ferrari into a real contender and Hamilton in a champion again? I read you in the comments.